Well, good morning. If you guys would open up the Word this morning to Exodus chapter 20. Thought you guys would say that for me instead of me saying it for you. We are once again hanging out at Mount Sinai. We will move on from here at some point. Some of you guys, actually many of you would be old enough to remember that there was a day in which if you were going to plan to do something on a Sunday, you're going to have a hard time finding a store to be open and people working that day, etc. Y'all remember blue laws? Y'all remember those? Right, now there's a bunch of people in the audience who don't remember blue laws. You know, the only thing left of blue laws is like Home Depot closes at 6 instead of at 9 or whatever. So it's a little shrunk, and you can't go to Chick-fil-A today, right? Other than that, I mean, I think everybody's up and at 'em. Everybody's doing work. Actually, that's not true. You got certain types of businesses that still remain closed on a Sunday, right? And so you have this observable dimension that comes from somewhere that was very common when we were growing up, that this seventh day, one of these days out of 7, was going to be treated differently than all the other days. And so you were going to trim things back, slow things down, you know, and you still see that, right? I mean, you still have adjusted hours in maybe a department store, has a little bit different hours. Some of them do. Some of them are still just open like they regularly are. But that's telling because we are living in a world where the culture is reshaping the way in which we do our lives. Now, how many of you guys know that standing up here as a Christian and saying that that's a fact is a little bit of a problem, isn't it? Because, I mean, we do know this, that our encounter with God as a people who have come to know the God of the universe means no matter what the culture around us is doing, God has ideas out of which we live our lives. Right, so today we're going to learn something, that this whole do something different one day out of 7 comes from somewhere. Right? And it gets written down carefully at Mount Sinai, but it's going to predate Mount Sinai. It's going to come before that time span. But let me go back to this point, because we've been studying the commandments. And I said something last week that maybe some of you can identify with, especially if you've been a Christian for a while. If you got saved in the 70s or the 80s, you lived through that time span, probably into the 90s as well. If you were in a healthy evangelical church, you were living in a time where there was a good, did you hear me say that? A good adjustment being made to draw attention to the grace of God in such a way that the idea that our actions before God would not shape God, wouldn't make him favorable toward us, right? We weren't going to base our relationship with God on how good we were doing. Because for years in the traditional Christian universe, that's what Christianity was turning into. It was very much about how good you were, had everything to do with what God was going to be like toward you. And so at some point the church recognized, hey, that's just not a good concept. That's not a biblical concept. We've lost something in the scriptures. So the shifting emphasis then at that point became the grace of God. So we heard much, you know, churches started naming themselves Grace Community Church, and everything became grace, grace, grace. And somewhere along the way, while trying to fix that wrong emphasis, there began to be a de-emphasizing of anything that sounded like commands or imperatives, or you need to do this. And so if I stand up here and if I hear somebody preach this way, and their language sounds like, listen, as a Christian, you have to blank, 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 blank. That you have to, the second I hear that, sirens go off in my head. Because I was raised to listen for the grace of God that doesn't have to have me do something for it to be what it is. But then we get to these commands, and what do we do with them? Well, what's convenient, but I think a theological shipwreck, is when you create this hostility between the new covenant and the old covenant. And so the Mosaic covenant gets to be this thing that we kind of shoot cannons at after we've moved past it. We're done with that thing now. We're in the new covenant now, and wasn't that a bad deal? What a cruel joke that was, wasn't it? That's the most ridiculous approach to God I've ever heard of. And we treat the Mosaic covenant like it was just a bad thing, because there are places in the new covenant where it sounds like they're doing that. But if you do that, you read the Bible in the weirdest of ways. Like these people who actually walked through time, stood at Mount Sinai, lived their lives reflecting on what God had said to them, they didn't know this was all a sham. This was all just God saying, look, I'm going to fake all you guys out. I'm going to make it look like if you do these things, it really matters, but it doesn't really matter because it's all grace and it doesn't really matter, and you'll figure that out later on. So we've got this big chunk of the Bible that looks like God was faking people out. Or was he really saying, if you do these things, it's a good thing? And if you do this and you live your life this way, it's a good thing? So we come to these commandments, and so today the one we're going to sit down in is the Sabbath commandment. Now the other ones are a little bit more universal feeling, but the Sabbath feels like, okay, that Sabbath thing, it feels like it belongs to that old way of doing stuff. And so back then, they did something, we don't do that kind of thing anymore. But yeah, they didn't murder, we don't murder. They didn't steal, we don't steal. A lot of them transfer, but this one, don't quite know what to do with this one. But can we remember this before we jettison this command and just say, oh, that's that old covenant thing? Can we remember when Jesus talked about the law, his mindset sounded like this. He summed up the law by saying, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon this, all the law and the prophets depend. So whatever the 10 Commandments are telling us, Jesus made a comment about it by saying, hey, love is involved here. So when the rule book comes down from heaven and it says, you shall have no other gods before me, God sees that decision for us to get in line with that command as an act of love. And it is, isn't it? Right? I've got nothing more important in my life than God, and I fight to keep it that way. Because I love God. That's what's in my heart toward him. And I think you'd say the same thing. When Jesus spoke about the commands, he didn't quite do to them what we do to them in let us adjust our theology practice. When the Bible speaks about commands, right? And you can look at this at some point later, but when 1 John says this, by this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments, right? So we're well into the new covenant here, and we still have a New Testament writer, the Apostle John, who is referring to a concept of commandments and relating them to love. He says, for this is the love of God. This is that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome. That's an interesting commentary. The New Testament looks back on God's commanding components in our lives. And when God commands something, let's face it, sometimes God's idea of saying, do this way now, bumps into, but God, I do it this way, and I don't do it now, I do it at a different time. And the second that conflict happens, to me, that command feels like a burden now. Because I have to adjust. I'm getting slowed up. I got to do my life a little bit differently. But there's something wrong in my understanding here, because John says these are not burdensome. So maybe I'm just looking at them wrong, right? And so when Jesus spoke about the Sabbath that we're going to read about here, he adjusted the people who are misusing these commands by telling them, hey, listen, man wasn't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was what? Made for man. So when Jesus touches this idea that there's this Sabbath thing out there, he makes it sound like it's a gift. And it's a command, you shall keep the Sabbath. But when Jesus comments on it, he relates it to loving God, and he relates it to a gift. This thing was made for you. Not so that you would labor underneath it. It was made for you. It's given to you as a gift. And so I want us to see some of this element. There's so much we could talk about in these commands, but this is where I feel like we're going to land today. So let's jump down into this particular command in Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 God says to his people, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Lord, thank you. Thank you for inventing things. Lord, this isn't something you inherited. You didn't rest on the seventh day because that's what the God before you did. That's what the union called on you to do as God. Lord, you set a pattern in place. You invented a day of rest and you passed it on to us. And you call on us to do something here in these passages called keeping it, treating it a certain way. And so Lord, what does that mean for us? God, open our hearts, open our ears and our understanding, and open your word to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, here are a couple of basic components, right? This word Sabbath, it means to cease something. It means to rest from something. So this Sabbath idea is you're taking a break from, you've heard of a sabbatical. People take a sabbatical. They take a break from their normal routines, their normal actions. So when the Bible installs this idea, one of the primary things it's installing is whatever you've been doing is about to get disrupted. Don't miss that, because that's a very, very important thing in ever benefiting from these concepts. Right? So the Sabbath comes along and says, rest. You know, the activity of your normal life, take a break from that. But it's not just take a long nap. It's not just veg on the sofa, although I think that's part of it. And I do practice vegging on the sofa on Sundays. With golf playing in the background quietly, in case you just want to know how to really practice the Sabbath. He goes on here and he says, this is a day that's to be holy and it's to be to the Lord. Right, so it's not just hey, let me just stop what I'm doing. It is stop what you're doing and do this on this day. Set this day apart to the Lord. John Piper says, keep it holy means set it aside from all other days as special. Specifically, as verse 10 says, keep it to the Lord or for the Lord. In other words, the rest is not to be aimless rest, but God-centered rest. He's saying, in effect, let my highest creature, the one in my image, stop every 7 days and commemorate with me the fact that I am the creator who has done all this. Let him stop working and focus on me, that I am the source of all that he has. I am the fountain of blessing. I have made the very hands and mind with which he works. Let one day out of 7 demonstrate that all land and all animals and all raw materials and all breath and strength and thought and emotion and everything come from me. Let man look to me in leisure one day out of 7 for the blessing that is so elusive in the affairs of this world. All right, before we look through a couple of passages here of the Old Testament practice, I think I put in your outline this question, the transcendent why. Why, God? A Sabbath rest. Why? Right, whether you're standing in the Old Covenant, the New Covenant, or before the Old Covenant, the Mosaic Covenant. Why? Well, it follows God's pattern. That's where he references and says this originates in what God has done. So like all commands, there is a God dimension to why they are the way they are. And then secondly, because we need it. We need a break. We need an adjusted focus in our lives. So I just need a point that regularly is going to show up in my life, that I just stop all the noisy activity and I turn my attention to God. I need that. So God has a pattern of what he has done, but I need that pattern in my life So that's where this comes from. Here, quick view of Sabbath in the Old Testament. Exodus chapter 31. Let me just pull out a few ideas from their Sabbath practice. Verse 15 says, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Right now, so I know most of us treat Sabbath practice, Sunday activities, not at that level, right? So, that captures my attention, right? This is not a speeding ticket, apparently. This makes the Sabbath a pretty important dimension of the lives of these people that God installed into their civil law, into the law of the nation, the death penalty around breaking this command. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 3 says, there are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, a day of sacred assembly. You're not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. Right? So now we have, associated with this day, we have an idea that it's a day of rest, and so we learn something about God's agenda here, but it's also a day of assembly. So there's a gathering dimension to the Old Testament practice of the Sabbath. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 12 says, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. You shall remember. This is what you do with the Sabbath. You remember on that day that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. All right, so here's another Old Testament principle that we learn about the Sabbath, that it was a day of remembering. It was a day to stop all the noise and all the practice and all the quickness of life and all the planning that we've got going on and bills to be paid and schedules to keep. Stop on this day and remember something. Remember the God who created everything. We've already learned that because he set 6 days and then the day of rest. So we're remembering who he is, and then we're also remembering what he's done for us. He had rescued them. So there was a recalling to mind that element. And in Nehemiah chapter 9, and this is probably 1,000 years after Mount Sinai's meeting, where Nehemiah is bringing the people back into the realities of their covenant relationship with God. They have forgotten these things. They have stopped practicing them. So he's highlighting what God has done for them. And he comes to this point in verse 13. He says, you came down, speaking of God, you came down on Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven and gave them right rules and true laws, good statutes and commandments. And you made known to them your holy Sabbath and commanded them commandments and statutes and a law by Moses, your servant. So this is an interesting passage to me. In the day of recalling what God has done and what God has given us, he sums up all 10 of the commandments and only specifically mentions one of them. God gave us commands. Doesn't say anything about what those commands were except for this one of practicing the Sabbath. I just find that a little peculiar in Nehemiah mentioning that. Now, I don't think in any way that means that, well, the Sabbath's the most important one. I don't think at all it means that. But I do find it intriguing that when God sums up commands and laws and concepts and he sticks them in a list of 10, if you will, because we all know there's 10 commands. There's many commands in the Bible, but we know of the 10 commandments. One of them is about the Sabbath. Really going to use up that kind of real estate on that? On what you do one day out of the week? That's that big a deal? What if it is a pretty big deal? What if it is, when you start to blow this commandment off, the next thing you're going to do is blow off the first one? That you shall have no other gods before him. I mean, let's just follow the line of evidence here, right? What might be the reason for me not to be able to keep the Sabbath? Something else more pressing? Something else more urgent? So I begin to neglect the Sabbath because there's another rival God creeping up in my life. So I might need to take into account something about what's the nature of this command trying to help with, right? Remember, the Sabbath was made for man. Why? Well, because of the enormous human need that you and I have to prioritize remembering. That day is a day to stop all that you're doing that's crowding in on you, pressing in on your life. You put the brakes on, you detach, you Sabbath, you separate and take a break from, and in a different way than you have been doing, you turn your attention to God in a way that reminds me of some things. The Bible's big on remembering, right? Quite a bit of what is in the Bible is designed to make us remember something. The Bible's big on what's going on in our heads, renewing our minds. What we know is accentuated over and over. And let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, but let him know this. Let him boast in it, that he understands and knows me. There's something about the mental faculties of our minds that we need to engage God. And God steps in and says, hey, you know what? This is an enormously important element. I want to devote a day to make sure that there is always regularly in your life a moment where you stop everything and you detach from those things and you turn your attention to me so we can just kind of reorient our lives. If that's needed for us, because I think God creates a Sabbath because man needs the Sabbath. If that's created for us, then what happens after you skip that once or twice or 10 or 20 or 30 weeks in a row of barely detaching and acknowledging God? Where do you think your heart is when that becomes the storyline of our lives? That's just not going to be a place where we're thriving spiritually. I just don't think it's possible. Right? In this passage in Deuteronomy, we looked at it a little bit last week, in Deuteronomy chapter 8. We're 40 years after Mount Sinai now. They've wandered in the wilderness. They're on the verge of going into the promised land. It's going to be great. The brochures are incredible. Just seeing palm trees and all kinds of fruit stuff. And there's businesses to be had. There's mining to be done. This is going to be incredible to be in the promised land. And God says to them in Deuteronomy 8, so you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. Right, that's a commentary on the commands. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land. A good land. And you shall eat and be full. And you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Take care lest you forget the Lord by not keeping his commandments. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. Most of us spend a lot of time in our life praying for God to make us prosperous. We just want an upgrade on just about everything, don't we? We want a better job. We want it to be a better paying situation. We want to clear our bills in a better way than we're clearing them right now. We ask for this promised land goodness. It's going to be good. And you're going to taste of this land. It's going to be good. You're going to feel this sense of, that's pleasurable. That's enjoyable. And God said it would be. And God didn't say you were wrong for enjoying it, by the way. So we're enjoying the good of the land, and then God slams on the brakes right in the middle of us. Hey, guys, it's going to be a feast. You're going to own businesses. I'm going to give you the power to create wealth in your life. You're going to be wealthy. There's minerals in the ground. There's fruit everywhere. And it's a land flowing with milk and honey. You guys are going to be the envy of the neighborhood. It's going to be amazing. But just be careful. Because once you start feeling and tasting and experiencing all that, the next thing you're going to be in danger of doing is forgetting me. You guys remember the hymn that we sing, prone to wander, prone to leave the God I love. Listen, do you know that about yourself? Or do you think somehow you've got some special connection with God that you can go into the land and taste everything that's amazing and I'm good. That's never going to become too important to me. That's never going to displace God. That's never going to cause me to forget who God really, really, really is in my life. That I'm never going to become dependent and freaked out and panicking because I think it's my hands that have given me the power to create wealth. Because I work 8 days a week. Well, only the Beatles worked 8 days a week. But I'm working and working and working. And I become convinced. Listen, why do you, if God says, hey, don't work on this day, why do you work on that day? Because I need to. I need to work on that day. What if God says, hey, just take a break, I got you covered? Well, that doesn't work for me, God. Why not? I got you. No. The only way that my work works is if I show up and work, man, okay? That's how I'll make money. I got to show up and work. I got you, God says. I want you to rest. Disengage. Don't even worry about it. No, I can't do that, God. You see, you keep telling God, I can't do that because you've, at some point, stopped looking to Him. And you've become convinced of what this verse warns us of. My power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. So if that's true, my power and my hands need to stay engaged all the time to keep my world being what it is. And God has become less the source of power to me. And all the misery and all the anxiety and all the freaking out that goes with that comes right with it. So what a gift God gives when He says, how about I introduce you to take a break and just look to me? What a gift that is. That's a gift. Otherwise, I get enslaved to my own abilities to make my life something that's going to be good, protected, fruitful, enjoyable, provide for my family, all those things. This is a gift. But this is an important moment. For God recognizes this. If God hadn't created a pattern where He says, hey, work 6 days, stop. Do something different. Specifically do this toward me. Work 6 days, stop. Turn to me. Put that other stuff down. Work 6 days. If God hadn't done that, He knows that we would create perpetual motion. We would just chronically be doing things. More and more and more and more and more things. Now, let me be careful here because we are the most luxuriant, leisure-oriented society that perhaps has ever existed. So, our issue, I don't think, is as much, when I say work, I don't think it's as much punching a clock, showing up for your work, submitting to your boss with your activity or running your business, whatever it is. I think it's just the lifestyle that we create can create such a perpetualness that what it never has in it is a moment where we unplug from it, shut things down, take a break from this life that's so hectic and busy and full of activities and things to manage and stuff to do, and devote our attention to God in a way that doesn't feel rushed, hurried, just let me just check this box off and go on. Right? The Sabbath was a disengagement for the sake of full engagement. And we're all Americans live in some form of the American lifestyle. And so I know, we're all trying to figure out how to manage a work week that turns into an even busier weekend. Weekends are crazy, aren't they? They're stuffed full of all the things that we can't get to during the work and the school week. And all kinds of organizations and people have crowded their activity into that setting because, they can't get at you. You're at work during the week and your kids are in school. They can get at you on the weekend. So they crowd stuff into the weekend. Well, I grew up in the day, and most of you guys here grew up in the day when those organizations, they didn't schedule stuff on Sunday. Y'all remember that day? I remember my high school basketball coach got hacked off about something that we did and wanted us to practice on Sunday. It was scandalous. It freaked the parents out, and he had to schedule it in some corner of Sunday night or something. It's like, he knew, you can't step on this. There's some kind of holy ground thing on these blue laws, and people go to church on Sundays, etc. You can't step there. You do recognize ain't nobody respecting that anymore. Now, if I was playing basketball, I'd be asked probably to play a game on Sunday morning. Many people used to be able to attend church because they didn't have to work on Sunday morning. And now they've got work issues taking place. Which, by the way, just for the sake of people not feeling guilty about, what I'm going to work on. You recognize when we get to the New Testament here, we shift from Saturday to Sunday. Right, you're going to watch this happen in just a second. Sunday was the first day of the week. So Christians were living in a time in which the first day of the week, people worked on the first day of the week. So their gatherings had to be done actually around their work issues when they came together. So it wasn't like, hey, I got saved last week, so hey, boss, I won't be coming in on Sunday no more. Got saved last week, I'm a Christian now. One, he wouldn't have known what the heck a Christian was. But secondly, the pattern of life was the pattern of life. So there's a Sabbath principle here. You don't want to do it wrong. But there is a need for us to significantly turn our attention from things to God. That's what this Sabbath is. And if it's become anything less than that, then we are missing out on something that we need, right? Thomas Watson was a Puritan writer. He said, God made this day on purpose to raise the heart to heaven to converse with him. That needs to be what the end of this day feels like for you. And what I want to install today is I want you to get to the end of this day and be able to ask yourself the question, did I engage God today? Did he and I have meaningful exchange today? Did I detach so that I could connect with God today? Can I finish this day knowing that I needed this day in a particular way, and I connected with God in a way that he said that I needed it. Right? Quick thought on just understanding the continuity and discontinuity. When things transfer from the Old Testament into the New Testament, they don't all transfer exactly the way they were in the Old Testament. Right? Without going into details, you can go back and review your stuff from the summer. But remember, in the Old Testament, you're going to find primarily three types of laws. You're going to find civil laws, ceremonial laws, and moral laws in the Old Testament. They don't all transfer into the New Covenant the same way, right? The civil laws had to do with that chapter where God says, hey, this is how I'm going to reveal myself to the world in this time period. I'm going to select a nation, the nation of Israel. They're going to have a government, they're going to have borders, and they're going to have laws, civil laws. All right, so when God is done revealing himself in that chapter and he moves to the next chapter, into the person of Christ, and then the next chapter into the church, okay, those civil laws don't come with us. All right, so that's why sometimes you say, well, so how come your church doesn't execute people for missing church on Sunday? Okay, well, that would be the primary reason why. Because we're not transferring these civil laws, because we're not a nation, and these laws are not the way in which God is governing us. Then there's ceremonial laws, right? And some of those are related to some Sabbath issues, where certain ceremonial practices took place. But those ceremonial issues had to do with sacrifices and forgiveness and cleansing and being right with God. And they taught something to the nation of Israel and all of us as we read the Old Testament. But when Jesus comes as the Lamb of God, the last of the lambs to be sacrificed, to give his blood, to forgive our sins, to purify us and make us forever clean before God, those ceremonial laws are done. They're not going to be practiced anymore. So all the little food laws and how you clean yourself and how you get ready for things, okay, that's not going to transfer. But what about the moral laws, right? We don't jettison, that Moses was the one who said don't murder. I can murder if I want, right? Nobody does that, right? Moses had this really narrow legalistic tendency, you shall have no other gods before me. But I'm in the new covenant, man, so 2 or 3 gods on the side is not a problem. This transfers, right? And so there's a dimension in which the Sabbath, which is actually, many refer to it as a creation ordinance. It is something we learn, kind of like marriage is a creation ordinance. In the original intent of God's design, he set some things into humanity's existence. So humanity, you are on this planet different than everybody else. You are here to subdue and manage the world on my behalf. All right, well, that's a creation ordinance. We don't learn that from Moses. We get that from creation. We get marriage from creation. We get the Sabbath of God resting in creation. So there's what transfers to us. Now, it's not going to be an exact transfer from the Old Testament into the New, but if you just pick up some examples here in your outline there, Old Testament Sabbath keeping transferred to New Testament Lord's Day. All right, so we still find this principle in our lives in the New Testament. Acts chapter 20, verse 7 says, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together. So you see there's a day of the week. So there's a weekly cycle that's in place. And then there's a gathering dimension. So those are both Sabbath ideas. And we were gathered together to break bread. All right, so the breaking of bread most often refers to the celebration of communion, which was a meal of remembrance. So you see how much of the Sabbath is transferring to what we do? It is a moment every week where there's a gathering of God's people and we intentionally remember some things about God and what he's done. That's what they did in the Sabbath in the Old Testament. That's what we do today. 1 Corinthians 16, Paul says, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do on the first day of every week. So this is a regular meeting pattern that they practice. Each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper. Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, the Apostle John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. And the Lord's day came to be understood as the resurrection day, the day the Lord resurrected. So that was the first day of the week. It became the day set apart for these Sabbath-type principles to be practiced in the New Testament church. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23 says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some. So there was an established practice of regularly gathering together and assembling with other believers. So you see this, this is the practice that informs us. It is not an exact transfer of the Sabbath, but it sure is borrowing a lot of its principles into the church today. Right, Philip Ryken, in his commentary, says, the Puritans referred to the Sabbath as, quote, the market day of the soul. I appreciate that, when Gina and I visit Europe, and you see how people live still going to the market on a regular basis. Not like us, we just go get frozen stuff, chalk it away, and don't go to the store again forever. They go to the market. It's just a regular thing that they do. He says, whereas the other 6 days of the week were for ordinary commerce, this is the day on which we transact our spiritual business, trading in the currency of heaven. This day, a Christian is in the altitudes, wrote Thomas Watson. He walks with God and takes, as it were, a turn with him in heaven. We meet with God by prayer and the ministry of the word, by singing his praises and presenting our offerings to him, by celebrating the sacraments and sharing Christian fellowship. The result, according to Watson, is that the heart, which all the week was frozen on the Sabbath, melts with the word. Now listen, this is not an advertisement for Sunday Christians. All right, that's another pendulum swing. But we have swung the pendulum in such a strange way that somehow in our understanding of grace and the operation of God, and we don't want to just be Sunday Christians, well, that means we're Christians every day, right? All of a sudden, this day has become less and less and less and less meaningful, necessary, and practiced. And I get it. That's a good thing. I don't want anybody here to be Christians on Sunday and jerks the rest of the week. Right? Isn't that kind of, all right, well, we take that for granted. That's if you're a Christian, you're a Christian. That defines you. It's your identity. It's the source of life that you live every moment of your life. It's not something you put on when you enter the country club realm. But the other side of that is we have become a people who are so casual about how we approach spiritual things that Sunday isn't sacred anymore. We don't treat it and handle it with great carefulness. It's just another day of the week, and quite honestly, it's that other busy day on the weekend that, if I get too much going on a weekend, the modern Christian today is going to jettison Sunday morning. That's what they're going to jettison. They're not going to cancel an event. They're not going to just fight through their fatigue. They're going to cancel Sunday morning. And that doesn't transfer from the old covenant. Right? Because the old covenant, they were overly careful, if you will, about what they did with the Sabbath, because the Sabbath was a source of identity for all the people in the world. Even though they live on 7-day cycles, which is interesting, they don't practice the Sabbath. But the people of God are different than everybody else because that marks them. They practice this special day in their lives. And so, as special as the Son of God is lying in a tomb and awaiting ointment, they will not go to him. The women will not go to him on the Sabbath. They will wait until the next day to go. That's God himself. His body is in a tomb. And yet these women had such a regard for this day that was to be treated holy that they would not do that. We have lost some of that holy ground component in our lives. We have treated things so casually and so optional in our lives that might it be that if I'm really, really, really needing, the Sabbath was made for man, if I'm needing something like this in my life, what kind of harm is coming into my life when I ignore it? That's a legitimate question. I know that doesn't feel like, well, we'll have church next week. You can miss a week. Well, listen, I get it. I get it. But how important is this? Remember, it makes a top 10 list. Ought to get your attention. Of all the things that could be in the top 10 list, this one's in the top 10 list. It's the only one singled out by Nehemiah. You used to get killed for missing church. All those things, you put them together, it's kind of like, all right, well, apparently this is not a small deal. All right, you got my attention. But there are these patterns in Scripture that follow this Sabbath sort of a principle. This practice of detach from that and connect to this. Detach from that and connect to this. So the Sabbath is not the only practice like this, right? So when you look at things like prayer and fasting in the Bible, every day, this seemed to be Jesus' pattern, was no matter how busy, no matter what activity was needing to take place that day, he was going to detach from this and connect to God. He was going to detach from this and connect to God. And there would be urgent things going on. There'd be crowds gathering. They'd be looking for Jesus' miracles. People are waiting in line in the heat to experience a miracle. Where's Jesus? He went off to pray. He was going to detach from this and connect to God. There's something about these patterns. The Bible doesn't talk about fasting like, that weird concept way out there that there's some people dressed in still sheepskins and living on the edge of a desert and they fast. The rest of us fasting, come on, that's like for really, really over the edge Christians, right? Well, the Bible actually says when you fast, don't be as the Pharisees. It doesn't say if you fast. It says when you fast. Well, what exactly is fasting? It is detaching from that po' boy and connecting to something else. And there's something about it that I need. I need to take the natural forces of my life and tell them to go sit in that chair right now and don't do anything. Sit there and be quiet. So when I fast, that's what I'm doing. And my body, is sitting in that chair the whole time going, okay, I'm a little hungry right now. And then a little while later, it's going like, this is getting really, really uncomfortable. Are we going to eat anytime soon? And then it's, screaming a little louder. And so the natural forces of my life that threaten to take control of my life are being told, you go sit down over there and you be quiet while I spiritually connect with God. That's what you're doing in prayer, too, when you take your attention away from the people that are squeaking in your life and the schedule that's demanding and all the things you got to get to today. Right? God installs these things. This is the practice that God installs all over the place. The Sabbath is a massive example of it. It's a regular, put it on a calendar, going to show up right here. And in that moment, you're going to detach from your regular life, your natural activities of life, and you're going to connect with me. Right? Do you understand tithing is that as well? Right? There is a flow of finances that come into our lives. And God takes those finances, and tithing says this: detach from your need for this money and connect it to God. So here this money's coming in your life, but tell money where it gets to sit in your life. You do not rule me. You are not in charge of me. You do not determine my life. I am not dependent upon you. Watch. Sit down, and I take part of it and I give it to God. It is a detaching from something and a connecting to God. See, these principles, how vitally important are these things? But if I just threw those on the table and I said, and I'm kind of am throwing them on the table right now, and I am asking you to do this. Wander around your life and find out the condition of these things. Because in the modern setting of gathering in a Sabbath type way with God's people, inconsistency is the word of the day. I talk to all kinds of pastors and try to keep up with what's going on in their churches. The word inconsistent is used more often than anything else. People are inconsistently involved in church more than they ever have been. So you take Sundays kind of become this thing that apparently God said we needed something like this, but I don't know that I'm going to take him up on that every week. I mean, a couple times a month, yeah, we'll make it work a couple times a month. And then prayer. This daily, if you will, I think daily is a good practice, detachment from the natural and connection to God. But if you survey most Christians, you find that's really poorly done. If done, it's poorly done. Fasting, forget it. That ain't happening for 99 out of 100 Christians aren't fasting. Tithing, right? I mean, you do your own survey right now. Do you tithe? Do you tell your money where to sit in your life? You say, no matter what life is calling for me, I'm going to do this with that. I'm going to detach from the natural component and attach myself and connect to God. All right, so what happens when you take Sabbath and neglect it, prayer and neglect it, fasting and neglect it, tithing and neglect it? Does anybody really seriously think spiritually you're going to be doing well? I think the reason why this sits in the top 10 is because these things enable the other things. Because if loving God with all my heart and soul and mind and strength is what the commands are about, these things enable me to do that. Right? Now, keep the commands out of the bad pile, right? Don't turn them into, okay, that just sounds like legalism. Well, it's only legalism if you are picking those commands up as a means of self-justifying yourself, to make you right with God or to somehow make God get right with you. That is legalism. But if these are wise practices for God's people, because man needed the Sabbath, he needs to take a break. He needs to not be dependent upon these kinds of things, whether it's food or time or schedule or your ability to create wealth. You need a break from that, and you need to be able to turn away from that to God in every one of those categories and recognize, God, you are the source of these things. So I've got all this crazy stuff going on this week, but God, you know what? This time I will take from that because I don't need all those things to give me the life that comes from you. So I make room for Sabbath in my life, if I really and truly believe that. Now listen, if I don't do that, here's what ends up happening. Right? The commandment right above this one is you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Right? And it's not the easiest word to translate. So we kind of use it as, don't use God's name like a curse word. There's a dimension where that's the case, but the word is a little more complicated than that, right? A couple of thoughts in your outline there. J.I. Packer says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. It says in vain means for unreality. What is forbidden is any use or involvement of God's name that is empty, frivolous, or insincere. One commentator says, he prohibits futile, purposeless naming of God, whether in our daily speech, in our lifestyles, or in our worship. Purposeless, empty words. How many of you guys know that we could have just sang some really purposeless songs a few minutes ago? Walked in here this morning angry as all get out, unforgiving, relentlessly wanting somebody to do the right thing in our life and sing songs about God's forgiveness. Empty. I can walk in here concerned about stuff, people, things, and sing words that never connect with me because I leave here as anxious as I came in. That's vain. I have a God with no power in that moment. I have a God who's not making a difference in my life. I have a God who is small and weak. And I have taken his name in vain rather than to recognize the God who is for me makes all the difference in the world in these needs of my life. And I'm affected by that. And until I am affected by that, there's a sense of vanity, disconnection, unreality in my life. And in these moments, let me tell you, Sunday morning needs to be a time where you come with your gym clothes on. You come wrestling thoughts to the ground, kicking them in the head every chance you get to replace them with what you need to be thinking and believing about God. And if you come in here, it's kind of like, oh, man, it's been a busy Saturday, man. I'm just checking this box off. I'm so tired. I hope Keith doesn't go as long as he usually goes. Is it over yet? Is it done? How long are the notes today? Right. If I'm coming in that way, I guarantee you this has turned into something that it was never supposed to be. Because your week is going to beat the faith out of you all week long. You live in a fallen world that will be relentless. And then the enemy might decide to get involved with you on Thursday and Friday and jack that thing up even worse. And you need this moment. Because God ordained it to be something. A detachment and a refreshing and a connection to God and some vitality that comes back into my soul. And I walk out of here on a Sunday, not because I'm a Sunday Christian, because I can get some of that wherever. But I do know God has placed something here. And I don't come in here like this casual, everything's casual, because nothing really matters, man. There's nothing about Christianity that really matters, really. Just kind of just doing whatever. Read my Bible? Yeah, sometimes. Pray? Well, yeah. Oh, I always mean to, but. And we wonder why our experience is so weak. We lack so much sense of adventure and joy in our faith. Right? These things are kind of needed things in our lives. Now, let me give you an illustration that I want us to pray about. I'm going to introduce you to planet lifestyle. This is a bit of a physics lesson. Every once in a while I have to use my engineering background, so just tolerate me, okay? In the history of man, thousands of years, generation after generation after generation, it has only been in some of our lifetime, some of you are old enough to remember this, that man has figured out how to escape the gravitational forces of the earth. Up until that time, whatever goes up must come down. And you guys listen to Three Dog Night growing up? Is that how you got that? Didn't pay attention in science class, but you listened to Three Dog Night. That's great. So there is this powerful force being exhibited on humanity, and we call it gravity. It's the gravity of the planet Earth. And no matter how hard man determines or wants to, he cannot escape that. He can learn to fly for a little while, but at some point he comes back down until finally, right, in our generation, they invented rocket power and there was this ability to go up and not come back down. Well, in a similar way, you and I live attaching our lives to something called planet lifestyle. Right? Now, the way in which gravitational forces work, the bigger an object is, the more gravitational force it exerts on whatever is around it. So if you got a little planet that's got low density, then it exhibits a little bit of force. You got a bigger planet that's got higher density and more mass to it, it experiences a lot more force, holds you in place. So the guys travel to the moon and it's like, hey, look at this, boom. And they can float, right? And they're jumping. Hey, what goes up takes a lot longer. As a matter of fact, if we don't put some weight on us, we might not come back down. But we don't have that problem here, right? Because the mass of the earth is so big and so powerful that jump all you want, you're coming back down, right? And in some ways, this is how I see some of us in the Christian life. We come to a service like this one. We hear a message about something that, man, I see. Yeah, Keith, okay, I'm with you. I see it in the Bible, yeah. I ought to have a lifestyle that's making this kind of room for God in it to encounter Him. I need it. Yeah, okay, I'm convinced. Maybe you hear a message about prayer and do the same thing. It's like, oh, man, I know. This has been long enough, doggone it. I'm done with this. This is it. I've been talking about having a prayer life since I've been a Christian, and I'm going to have a prayer life now. And so we determined that on Monday, we are going to have a prayer life. And it lasts until Tuesday or Wednesday, or maybe if you can jump really, really high, it lasts a little bit longer. But at some point, whatever goes up comes right back down. We mentioned finances here. We've had offering issues. Hey, what can we do here to contribute toward the cause and mission of God here? All right, so at some point, you're gonna look at your life and you're gonna say, hey, okay, we're gonna give toward this, like God's really given us faith to give toward this. But your giving perhaps going to look like this. And you went up and you gave a little bit and you managed to go a month. Man, this tithing thing, I'm going to do it for a month. And after a month, you go back to whatever you were doing before, right? So why is it that our prayer lives, our reading lives, our sabbatical practices, our giving, why does it go up and come down like that? Well, because of the size of our lifestyles. Our lifestyles are so big. Our lifestyles are not little bitty planets. They are big planets that exert gravitational pull on our lives. And so if I were to ask you here, how many of you guys would like to have, it's in your heart, you would like to have a daily practice of relating to God in prayer? How many of you guys would like to have that? How many of you guys would like to be able to give 10% of your income to God for the glory of God and for the kingdom of God? Maybe even more than 10. How many would like to do that? You would like to be gathered with God's people every Sunday. I want to be together with God's people, right? This is not a lack of desire on our part, is it? Because I'm pretty sure everybody in the room wants that. But we answer back and we say, but you don't understand, I can't do that. Right? There's a reason why I can't do that prayer thing every day. And there's a reason why I can't give 10% of my income. And there's a reason why I can't be here or gathered together every Sunday. And it has everything to do with how big planet lifestyle has become. And so, these are helpful insights, and I find we come into agreement with them pretty easy, but I find when we go to live them out, we can't find them in our lives because we can't fit them in our lives. And so we've developed the practice. We've built lives that are too big. Planet lifestyle is too big. So next weekend and then 2 weekends after that, when the weekend gets crowded, man, I just can't do all that and do the church thing too. Or I just can't give because I've got bills to pay and we've got education costs and we're traveling a bit and our house note, and we've got reasons why our life has become this big, and our life now is telling us you don't get to do that and you don't get to do that. And I know you'd like to do that, but you don't get to do that. And we jump for a moment and we come right back down to earth. So in some ways, the only It's not as though God doesn't do something bigger than these things. He does. But, if you need a miraculous raise Lazarus from the dead every time you go write a check to the church, you're in trouble. I'd say, oh, honey, we're going to tithe this month. Oh, God's going to have to do a miracle. Or, all right, that's it. I'm going to have prayer time this week. And God's going to meet me. He's going to meet me. It's going to look like Pentecost part 2. And I'm going to be in my prayer closet this week. Because the gravitational pull is so great, it takes a massive move of God just for us to do whatever little things in faith that we're called to do. So listen, we can preach these things from the Word. I almost never have anybody come up and say, hey, Keith, that's not even in the Bible, man. Why are you asking us to do that? We all want to do these things. But we just can't seem to pull it off, can we? And we never will. Until we decide, I want a life that has these things in it. And if my planet needs to be a little smaller in order to have these things in it, well, then my planet will be smaller. And what's interesting is these are planet-reducing practices. God reaches in these kinds of categories and he says, okay, tell you what, there's 7 days in the week, I'm taking one of them away from you. Well, that sounds like a penalty. No, it's a gift. It's a gift in your life. I'm going to reduce the size of your planet by 1 day. Oh God, don't take a day, add a day. You don't understand my planet. I need more time than that. And God says, no, that's why you sound like that, Keith. Because you've tried to create an 8-day week instead of living in a 6-day one. But God, if I got to live in 6 days, that's gonna mess up a lot of stuff. Yes, it is. I might not be able to do some things. That's exactly right. And I'm choosing to limit your life. Right? When we think about our God chooses to take 10% away from your finances so he can make your planet smaller. But God, I can't do that, God. I got bills, I got this, I got that going on. And it says, well, you can live on this size planet. Right, this is the biblical practice that God seems to recognize. We have a need of detaching from and not being dependent upon some things and connecting with him in a very vibrant way. So I think this is much more than, hey, is that an old covenant deal or a new covenant deal? I think there's some principles here that indicate this is what man needs. I need this. My soul needs it. Right, and yours does too. All right, let's take a moment and pray together. You guys want to come back up? All right, let me do this. This is where I want you to get quiet. I want you to get real. I want you to be honest. At this point in the service, you are able to do something here. You're able to kind of stick some spiritual dipstick into your heart and pull it out and check and see, did you engage God this morning? Can you tell if you engaged God this morning? I've been in meetings where I did not engage God, so I know that's possible. But did you engage God this morning? Because this Sabbath thing doesn't mean a thing if it involves us just taking a break from activity. It's like, I come inside the building here and then I'm going to run out of here like a maniac and go back to my busy life. This is intended for us to engage God. I need to hear him. I need to experience him in all the varieties of ways that God would be speaking. I need a sense of faith flooding into my life. As I sang a song today and I said, God, that's true. God, thank you. That's true. That's more true than everything that's going on in my life right now. That's true. That's God getting your attention. And you got that because you detached. You took a moment away from all the noise You said, God, I'm turning down all the noise. I'm shutting off all my equipment. It's just me and you here, God. All right, so listen, if you're here this morning and that's not been your experience, can you make that your experience right now? You just get quiet before God. Can you maybe confess to God, God, too many Sundays for me have become disengaged Sundays. Too many days, Lord, in my week are disconnected from you. I'm not mindful of you. I don't celebrate and remember who you are to me. I don't call to mind your faithfulness. I don't ponder what you've called me to do and take steps of faith and obedience. And so God, I'm here this morning and this is the first conversation I've had with you in days. But I'm having it. Here I am, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for wanting to meet with me. For longing for settings where you would give me rest from the things that are turbulent and demanding and extracting in my life. Things that surface fears and frustrations. But thank you for that moment where you tell me to look away from those things and to look to you. And this is one of those places. And Lord, we need more than just this place, but God, this morning, would you let this be that place? Would you let this be a Sabbath rest for your people? Would you let conversations with you right now go on in this place? Where, Lord, we make eye contact with you. God, I know we can be in this place and we can sing a song and not make eye contact with you. God, you hate that. This is a solemn assembly. This is a holy time. This is a time where the God who sent his own Son to reconcile us to himself wants to make eye contact with us. Wants to say something to us. Wants to breathe life into us again. He wants to thaw out the cold places of our hearts. So God, be in this place and capture our attention. Pull our face toward yours. Speak to us as sons and daughters. Remind us, Lord, this was a day of remembrance where we remember I used to be in Egypt under the enslaving power of sin that dominated my life and wrote a script for me that it would never let me go free until you stepped in and broke its power and took me off its leash and said, Keith, you can have a different life. You can have a new life. You don't have to be controlled by your past. You don't have to be controlled by your impulses. God, we remember that day when you rescued us out of Egypt. You made us to be your own. God, we belong to you today. You had a land for us to dwell in. A land that was good, filled with your provision and your blessing. But some of us are living in such goodness, Lord. There's goodness in our relationships and our families. God, there's goodness in our provision. Lord, we are well provided for. Lord, what you had in store in that land, it's come true. It is a land of abundance. God, you have given success to our businesses and to our trades and to our activities and our careers. Lord, you have warned us, be careful in your day of success that you don't start thinking that this came from your own hand. And your job and your talents and your abilities become a curse in your life rather than a gift. God, would you help us this morning? Lord, this needs to be real for some folks here today. God, disconnect us from what our own hands can build for us. Disconnect us from the striving of our own efforts in our own lives. God, turn our attention to you. Remind us that all this is from you. God, you are in charge of it. I can be at rest. I can take a break today because my life won't go off the rails if every day I'm not consumed with the activities and the noise and the people of life. God, I pray for liberation in here, Lord. I pray somehow there'd be this flood of good news in our lives, that we leave this place today recognizing I can say no to some things. I don't have to have that time with that person on this day. I can put that off. I cannot respond to something because I'm setting some day aside, and I'm setting my attention aside. God, we pray for times of refreshing to come in the presence of the Lord. That's what your word says, Lord. There are times of refreshing for us in the presence of the Lord. Well, if you're here this morning and you're saying, I need to be refreshed in the Lord, tell the Lord that. Look him in the face. Say, Lord, I see I'm missing something here. I need to be refreshed. God, I do. I need your Spirit to stir me, to quicken and awaken faith and peace that passes understanding. Lord, I need an exchange with you. I need an encounter with you. The Bible says, be still and know that I am God. Be still. Listen. Listen for him. God, we thank you for helping us see something in your word and helping us see something about our own lives. But Lord, we also are aware that we live on planet lifestyle. God, I don't want to leave this room today just jumping and knowing whatever I experienced and whatever you're teaching me today is just going to come right back down and settle back into the same place that it's always been. God, would you give us the courage as a people, give us the faith as a people to make our planets smaller. God, to look on a day like today and say, how can I make this day less about those things and more about him? God, give me faith to do that. God, how can I daily make my routines less about pressure and people and more about communion with my God? God, how can I look at my finances and make them less about bills and activities and possibilities and more about dependency upon the living God? So God, if we're going to be this in the future, Lord, I cannot help but ask you, would you make our planets smaller so that your goodness is experienced and known to us and you are not foreign and you are not forgotten. That's why we need these things, Lord.